This is An Infinite Path, spoken word essays by Niles Heckman, some of which go on to become our documentary short subject films, half of which release freely here through the podcast, all of which can be found through your support at nilesheckman.com. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a beautiful human being. Although he was certainly not perfect, he was a perfect example of a religious person working within the structures of orthodoxy as a reverend who wasn't purely externalizing everything like sadly so much of religious systems do. He knew and understood the deeper notions, realizations, and truths about how at the inner, beautiful core of religious structures, the ones rarely seen, there relates messages not outside of oneself, or about corporealized deities, or an old man in the sky with some sort of celestial penis, but instead everyone, internally, intrinsically, esoterically. Because of that, he was quite a philosopher and was embodied with spirit. Much of my personal passion project work is what you might call having to do with spiritual or occult philosophy. As a somewhat esoteric documentarian, whether it be stills or moving images, I self-shoot footage personally to serve that purpose. We all must have streams of revenue and be good money managers as part of our journey, not only for independence, but also for not making life a struggle of subsistence and wage slavery. Robert Anton Wilson, who was an author, novelist, essayist, editor, playwright, poet, futurist, comedian, and self-described agnostic mystic, whose work revolved around the subjects of conspiracy and the Western esoteric tradition, spent many years working for Playboy magazine, for example, to pay the bills. A great way to look at our jobs, whether full-time or much better part-time if you can do that, as a conscious human being who's maturing beyond the don't think, just conform society of technological modernity, is how do you find something which is a job that is partially aligned with your own interests and passions, but will likely not be 100% in alignment, but also won't be so terrible it makes you want to commit shotgun suicide every week having to do. My passion creations, such as this podcast, essays, conversations, and documentaries I make, are not the only media I create. I occasionally do freelance work directing commercials for tech companies in the Bay Area, and another major part of what I also do to make fake money in imperial commerce is I shoot footage for various projects for others. I oftentimes, if not always, have either a still or video camera with me from my travels and am constantly documenting moments from my film work on a whim. Much of my travel footage I license out via a site I'm a member of called Film Supply. Not to make this a downgrade from what is hopefully a more metaphysical essay into an advertisement, but I will mention that as a full-service licensing agency, Film Supply partners with leading filmmakers to bring footage from their passion projects to you through their highly curated catalog. I do a great deal of shitting on massive corporate power, which, like a more right-leaning person would say, big government is the problem. What is equally, if not greater, a problem are big corporations. Small local government tends to operate better, and small businesses themselves can be great. The key to that is small, especially from the standpoint of a group of people getting together to accomplish things. A small group of people. That's why local, cute, small businesses are important in small towns you might pass through, or big cities you might be living in as well, which are rarely seen these days, aren't they? Sad to say, because of continued corporatization over many decades, which make it very difficult for you to open your own hardware store, and instead you must get a job at Home Depot. You know there will be more on that later, but I will end this side tangent by saying I am pro-small business. Film Supply is a great example of a smaller company that I am really happy to be a part of their team, and they have some really world-renowned filmmakers on board their venture that I'm happy to be on the same roster with. As someone that's very uncommercial, it's important to know what you're good at and what you're not good at, and they are a perfect venture to be affiliated with because all I have to do is shoot great stuff, and they basically deal with the rest, including interacting with the client. Studios, companies, brands, well-known names throughout the world go to them for licensing extra footage if they need to pick up shots here and there for their own various projects. Since the content of my personal work is quite esoteric, and of course I will say paradigm-destroyingly awesome, as you can tell by the themes I talk about on this venture, for example, as well as some of the content I make, when I send them footage, it's open season for anyone to buy it. And I have no real say or control over that, which is how the process of stock-type imagery works. Sometimes I see footage is purchased for something that I'm not personally in alignment with, but that's okay. Regardless, it is nice to see things pop up that you shot in other projects that deemed your footage of excellence enough to purchase it. So I will say that I'm happy to see some footage I shot unexpectedly pop up in a 2018 Super Bowl spot featuring the voiceover of Martin Luther King Jr. A commercial during the most watched moment in the Don't Think Joker Spiral technology tube of television, which goes to show the quality of the material visually is deemed worthy enough for the highest budget advertising. So here's the spot as audio only, of course, but you can search this out online via keywords along the lines of Ram Trucks, Super Bowl commercial, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. That's a new definition of greatness. By giving that definition of greatness, it means that everybody can be great. You don't have to know about Plato and Aristotle to serve. You don't have to know the theory of relativity to serve. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics in physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace. Soul generated by love.
Now, similar to Bob Wilson with his day job writing for Playboy, there is a major separation between the underlying content of what I make, meaning shoot footage for, and similar footage used in a different context for a corporate ad. This ad is an anomaly because it has a controversial element in it, essentially using the voice of the amazing American and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to essentially sell cars, i.e. one comment beautifully saying, "Witness the bastardization of the great humanitarian by seeing him posthumously reduced to a corporate shill." As someone that's worked in and out of ad agencies in Los Angeles in my former career, air quotes, I know that creating an emotional moment correlates to memorability, which is what this ad is obviously trying to do. A major American auto manufacturer and their advertising agency they hired to make this spot is saying, here's a product to be sold by the powerful words and the historical legacy of somebody that was very uncorporate military-industrial expansion of the machine on the front lines of fighting against the status quo. MLK's work was not just about racism, but a higher moral message about social justice, and that's why he became a problem. Much as Terence McKenna once would say, why don't they take you away with the things that you say? It's all about how many people you actually end up reaching. You're only put on the radar after you start reaching millions of people. And if you're only catering to a specific section of the society, it doesn't really matter so much. It's only when you start blending over multiple layers of the society that you become a problem. In regards to MLK's much larger and overarching comments about social justice, he would say lines like, "A nation which continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." And of course, military defense really means military offense. So Dr. King got it. He knew a few things, and his spirit is why he has been shown to have been on the right side of recent history, and why words spoken by him are just as pertinent and powerful 50 years later. Oftentimes, old words are reused anew, especially if they are words of substance and depth that philosophically can stand the test of time. Much of what MLK said during his life absolutely aligns with that way of being, and one can say that using or reusing these words in a new context, whatever that context may be, it allows people access to those original words said when they might not have otherwise even ever heard them. And his message of a new definition of greatness is to not look up at those at the top of hierarchies as great, Instead, those who are in service to others are truly the greatest because they are not concerned with ego expansion and ladder climbing, but instead everyday people who help one another in life. So hooray to that updating, or maybe even redefining of that term in the grammar, logic, rhetoric sense. This ad is very obviously polarizing in their use of Dr. King. The message being said is, of course, the most important part of the spot, and if you do actually watch it, you'll see that it's comprised of what's supposed to be slices of life Americana. I actually do interpret Dodge Chrysler's initial thoughts on this spot to say that the truck is meant to be at your service, America, as an American auto manufacturer. But this spot aside, a great ad does serve multiple boxes and should be memorable. I always do see a disconnect in advertising these days that may achieve those things but then have little to no correlation with the product. So any company's logo could be put at the end tag of the spot, whether or not you even remember who the company was. Marketing ploys are a good example of why one could look at these things and acknowledge them as essentially lightweight fluff, that they are purely to sell a product, but at the same time there is a lot of artwork and technical brilliance put into some advertising, which can be a way for people in the industry to make some profits off their skill set when those options aren't otherwise necessarily available. So the debate about that continues, as well as the debate about this 2018 Super Bowl commercial as well. Let's not forget another beautiful philosophical soul who's passed on, but his words live strongly on today. Bill Hicks said that if you work in marketing or advertising, you should seriously consider killing yourself. Which I find fucking hilarious, and I recently played a YouTube video for a marketing major, and that conversation didn't go very well. But the underlying message of what he was trying to convey is spot on. So instead of shotgun suicide, if you do work in the advertising field, perhaps a phase-out and job change are in order. That would help the world out a bit, by having one less person in the dreadful marketing and advertising cacophony, which tries to get larval puppet people sitting in front of televisions to buy crap they don't need, to hopefully recede a bit more into the forgotten shadows of time. Via an economy that is not based on militarism and consumerism, but more freedom, security, transparency, prosperity for all. Themes that King was an advocate of. A soul generated by love.